Have you ever stopped to think, was Yahweh known only to Israel? Or could it be that his name, his presence, and even his worship reached peoples long before there was any tribe, any patriarch, any covenant with Abraham? This question might seem bold, even unsettling. But what if I told you that there are clear hints in the scriptures that Yahweh was already being invoked, revered, and known long before Moses climbed Mount Sinai or before Jacob had his name changed to Israel? What if there were people outside the Hebrew genealogy who heard his voice, spoke his name, and even offered sacrifices to him? Today, we're going to dive into one of the most forgotten or ignored mysteries of the scriptures, the worship of Yahweh before Israel existed. A deep, powerful and revealing truth, a trail left by a God who has always been universal, far beyond geographical, ethnic or political boundaries. A God who never limited himself to a single people, but who, from the beginning, revealed himself to those who sought him with a sincere heart. But before we go deeper into this mystery, go ahead and leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. And if this topic has already stirred something in you, comment below. Do you think God spoke to other peoples before forming Israel? Your question might turn into our next video. Now here we go. Take a deep breath. Let's travel back in time, long before the Exodus, long before Sinai, because the story of the name Yahweh begins much earlier than we imagine. Let's start with one of the most striking scenes in the Bible. Moses before the burning bush in Exodus 3, a divine encounter, a calling, and a deeply human question, what is your name? And then the answer, I am who I am. Or in Hebrew, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. And right after that, God says, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. Exodus 3:15. It seems like this is the first time the name Yahweh is revealed, right? But what if it isn't? Pay attention to what he himself says. The God of your fathers. This means Yahweh was already known. That name wasn't news to those who had been taught by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now let's go even deeper. In Genesis 4:26, right after the birth of Enosh, son of Seth, we read, then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. The word translated as Lord here, in Hebrew, is YHWH, Yahweh. That's right. The worship of the true God began just 3 generations after Adam, long before Israel, long before any Abrahamic covenant. This changes everything. But how did these people know the name of Yahweh? Who taught them? Could it have been God himself, revealing himself directly to a people thirsty for truth? Could it have been the echoes of Eden, still fresh in the memory of primitive humanity? We don't have all the answers, but what's clear is that Yahweh was already being invoked long before the formation of a specific nation. He wasn't a tribal God, but the creator of everything and everyone. Let's move forward to Genesis 12:8. Abraham, newly arrived in Canaan, builds an altar to the Lord and calls upon his name. Again, Yahweh. This shows that even coming from an idolatrous land like Ur of the Chaldeans, he already carried with him the name of the true God. A name he recognized, revered, and proclaimed. What does this show us? That the knowledge of Yahweh wasn't an isolated revelation. It was a continuous thread, passed down from generation to generation, even amidst the spiritual corruption of the ancient world. God was there, he always has been, speaking, calling, responding to those who called upon him with sincerity, and now enters one of the most mysterious and fascinating figures in the Bible, Melchizedek. In Genesis 14, he appears almost cinematically. No introduction, no explanation, he just shows up. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. Genesis 14:18. Pay attention, this happens before any Levitical priest, before the law, before the tabernacle. And yet, here is a man, a king, a priest, who serves the Most High God. And what's even more striking, Abraham recognizes him. He doesn't reject him. He doesn't correct him. On the contrary, he bows spiritually before him and gives him a tithe of everything. And who was this Most High God? The text says, Creator of heaven and earth. It's Yahweh, the same one who spoke to Moses at the bush, the same one who created Adam from the dust, the same one who said to Abraham, Walk before me and be blameless. Hebrews 7 goes even further. It says that Melchizedek was without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, made like the Son of God. Hebrews 7:3. This leads many scholars to believe that Melchizedek might have been a pre-incarnate manifestation of Christ, or at the very least a type, a prophetic shadow of him. What matters here is, once again, we have a worshipper, a priest, a messenger of Yahweh outside of Israel. Yahweh was revealing himself. The light was shining in the darkness, even in the most unexpected corners of the ancient world. But it doesn't stop there. Let's talk about Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, a priest of Midian. Another character who, at first glance, seems secondary, but he's not. In Exodus 3:1, we read that Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, the priest of Midian. And later, after the Exodus, when Jethro visits Moses in the wilderness, he praises the God of Israel. Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians, Exodus 18:10. And he adds, Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods, verse 11. And more, Jethro offers sacrifices to God, and Moses, Aaron, and the elders of Israel eat with him. There's no rebuke, no correction, just fellowship. This shows that Jethro, though not an Israelite, recognized and worshipped Yahweh. Once again, Yahweh being worshipped outside of Israel. Once again, proof that God was acting among the nations. Now think with me. If even before the law was given at Sinai, men like Melchizedek and Jethro were already priests of the Most High God, what does that tell us about God's plan? It was never exclusive to one ethnicity. It always had a global purpose. It always sought honest hearts, regardless of origin. And speaking of worship beyond conventional boundaries, we have to mention a highly controversial figure, Balaam, a seer hired to curse Israel. A man who at first glance seems anything but a prophet. But then something unbelievable happens. Yahweh speaks to him. In Numbers 22:9 it's written, God came to Balaam and said, Who are these men with you? And Balaam responds, using the name Yahweh. He says, Yahweh has refused to let me go with you. Verse 13, yes, Balaam hears the voice of God directly, and he calls him by name. This is no small thing. It's a clear indication that he knew and recognized Yahweh's authority, even though he was a Gentile, even though he was geographically and spiritually distant from Israel. Even so, Yahweh spoke to him. Now, it's worth noting that Balaam later chose the path of corruption and greed, as recorded in 2 Peter 2:15 and Revelation 2:14. But the fact that even so, he was used by God to prophesy and even deliver one of the most beautiful prophecies about the Messiah, a star shall come out of Jacob, shows how Yahweh can use even broken vessels to fulfill his purposes. All of this leads us to a conclusion that, though surprising, is deeply biblical. Yahweh has always been the God of the whole earth. He was never a local God restricted to a Middle Eastern tribe. He is the creator, the sustainer, and the redeemer of all nations. And throughout history, even before the law, even before the stone tablets, even before the Ark of the Covenant, he was already revealing himself, and people were listening. And here comes one of the most intriguing stories of all, Job, an upright man, righteous, who turned away from evil. But the most curious part, he wasn't an Israelite. The book of Job takes place in the land of Uz, probably located somewhere between Edom and Arabia. And more, it's believed that the book of Job is one of the oldest in the Bible, perhaps even older than Genesis in its written form. And what do we find in Job? An intense, deep, and extremely personal relationship with Yahweh. Job speaks to God. He questions, laments, cries out. And in the midst of his suffering, he makes one of the most prophetic and moving declarations in all of Scripture. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. Job 19:25. Job knew God not as an impersonal force, nor as a distant entity. He knew Yahweh as Redeemer, as someone who lives, who hears, who acts. And more, he calls this God my. Not the God of Israel, not the God of the Hebrews, but my Redeemer. How is this possible? The only explanation is that Yahweh had been revealing himself long before the covenant with Israel. Job, like other righteous men mentioned in the Scriptures, was part of this bigger plan, a plan that always involved all of humanity. And it's worth noting that Job's friends, though full of flawed arguments, also speak of God with familiarity. They discuss divine justice, retribution, grace, sovereignty. This shows that even outside the Israelite context, knowledge of Yahweh was present, debated, and taken seriously. Now recall what Paul wrote in Romans 1:19-20. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. In other words, even without the law, even without the prophets, even without the Scriptures in hand, people could perceive and know something of God's character if they were willing to listen. And Yahweh, in his mercy, responded. These men, Job, Melchizedek, Jethro, Balaam, Enosh, weren't Israelites, but they knew Yahweh. They spoke to him. They were used by him. This shatters paradigms and destroys any notion of a tribal or partial God. Yahweh is universal. He always has been, and he always will be. But then, why did God choose Israel? Why one people, one nation? The answer lies in Abraham's very calling. In Genesis 12, Yahweh says, "In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." The purpose of choosing Israel was never exclusion, but mission. Israel would be the torch carrying the light to the world. It would be the people who prepared the way for the Messiah. But the light, that light, always shone for everyone. By the way, see how the Psalms echo this universal call. Praise the Lord, all nations, extol him, all peoples. Psalm 117:1. From the rising of the sun to its setting, let the name of the Lord be praised. Psalm 113:3. All the nations you have made shall come and worship before you, O Lord, and shall glorify your name. Psalm 86:9. This was always in God's plan, a name known among the nations, a glory spread to the four corners of the earth, a people formed not by blood, but by faith. And this brings us to the most beautiful revelation of all. The name of Yahweh becomes flesh in Yeshua, Jesus. The very name Yeshua carries the root of Yahweh's name. It means Yahweh saves. And what does Jesus do? He fulfills what the prophets foretold. He extends salvation to all. He speaks to Samaritans, Romans, Syrophoenicians, Greeks. He says, I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also. John 10:16. And when he sends the disciples, he doesn't say, go only to Israel. No, he says, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. Mark 16:15. Make disciples of all nations, Matthew 28:19, because God's plan never changed. From Enosh to Job, from Melchizedek to Paul, from to us. The call has always been the same. Seek me, and you will live. And he promised, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. Jeremiah 29:13. Now, maybe you're wondering, but what does all this have to do with me today? The answer is everything. Because if Yahweh spoke to people before Israel existed, if he revealed himself to men and women of different tongues, lands, and cultures, then he can speak to you too. You don't need a holy last name. You don't need to come from a religious lineage. What he's looking for is a sincere heart. Maybe you feel like an outsider. Maybe you think God doesn't speak to people like you, that you don't have the right knowledge, the right background. But this whole story proves the opposite. God has always spoken to those willing to listen. He's always revealed himself to those who seek. And today, he's calling you by name. He's saying, I am. I see you. I want you. You can be like Enosh, starting a generation that calls upon the name of Yahweh. You can be like Melchizedek, someone who lives amidst chaos but is a priest of peace. You can be like Jethro, a wise counselor who recognizes God's hand. You can be like Job, who even in the midst of pain declares, my Redeemer lives. You can even be like Balaam, someone who got lost but still hears God's voice and can be used by him. Yahweh is speaking. The question is, will you listen? If this message spoke to you, comment below. Which character impacted you the most? Which part of this revelation stirred you? We're here to walk with you. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel right now. There's a lot more content coming about hidden revelations in the Bible, topics few talk about, but that truly transform our faith. So remember, Yahweh didn't start with Israel, and he doesn't end with you. His story is bigger, deeper, and older than we can imagine. He's been speaking since the beginning, and he's still calling today. The only question left is, will you answer? Thank you for walking with us on this spiritual journey. If this message touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And until the next video, stay curious, stay strong in faith, and above all, keep seeking the truth in Yahweh, the eternal God.